I cheated on my husband after he donated his kidney to me, and I think I ruined the only real thing I ever had. I know how the title sounds. Trust me, nobody has said anything to me that I haven't already screamed at myself in the mirror. My husband gave me his kidney last year. And 1 month later, I admitted that I cheated on him. I've replayed the moment I told him so many times that it feels burned into my brain like a scene from a movie I can't stop watching. The worst part is that before all of this, he genuinely loved me in the purest way I think a person can love another human being. And I destroyed it. We met when we were 23. Back then I was healthy, loud, social, always dragging him to parties he didn't want to go to. He was quieter. Stable. The kind of man who remembered tiny things, how I liked my coffee, what side of the bed I slept on, the fact I couldn't sleep unless one foot was outside the blanket. He made me feel safe. Then, at 27, I got diagnosed with kidney disease. At first it was manageable. Medication. Diet changes. Constant fatigue. Then it got worse. Fast. People romanticize sickness online, but the reality is disgusting. You lose pieces of yourself slowly. I stopped recognizing my own face. I gained weight from medication. My skin looked gray. I was exhausted all the time. Dialysis made me feel like I was barely alive. My husband never complained once. Not once. He drove me to appointments before work. Sat beside me during treatments. Learned medical terminology like he was studying for an exam. When doctors said I'd probably need a donor eventually, he immediately volunteered to get tested. I remember laughing and saying, "You're not even going to think about it." And he just looked at me like I was crazy. Of course not. You're my wife. Nobody had ever loved me like that before. When we found out he was a match, I cried so hard I threw up in the hospital bathroom. The surgery happened 8 months later. He was terrified beforehand, even though he tried hiding it. I could tell from the way his hands shook while signing paperwork. But he still smiled at me before they wheeled us away. "See you on the other side," he joked. After surgery, everything changed physically. I finally felt alive again. Color came back into my skin. I had energy. I could breathe without feeling exhausted. Everyone kept calling us inspirational. His family treated him like a hero. Mine treated him like he'd personally saved my life. Because he had. But mentally, something inside me started unraveling. I didn't feel grateful. I felt trapped. Every time I looked at him, I remembered what he sacrificed for me. Every scar on his body felt like a debt carved into my chest. People would look at us and say things like, "You better never leave that man." As if my entire existence now belonged to him. And the sickest part? He never acted that way. Not once. The pressure came entirely from me. About 3 months after surgery, I went out with co-workers for drinks for the first time in over a year. I finally felt healthy enough to act normal again. One of the guys there, Eric, kept flirting with me all night. I should have shut it down immediately. Instead, I liked it. Not because he was better than my husband. Because he knew nothing about me. To him, I wasn't the sick wife. I wasn't the woman whose husband gave her a kidney. I was just attractive. Normal. Alive. And that feeling became addictive. Eric worked in marketing at the same company as me. Divorced. 36. Confident in that dangerous way older men sometimes are when they know exactly what to say. At first it was harmless. At least that's what I told myself. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings. Stop by my desk to make jokes. Text me memes during meetings. It felt stupidly exciting after spending years feeling like a patient instead of a woman. Meanwhile, my husband was still treating me like glass. He meant well, but it drove me insane. "Don't lift that. You should rest. Are you sure you're not overdoing it?" I know he was scared of losing me again. Rationally, I understood that. Emotionally, I felt suffocated. One night Eric and I stayed late after work preparing for a presentation. Everyone else had already left. We were sitting in the conference room eating vending machine candy and talking about relationships. He asked me if I was happy. I should have said yes immediately. Instead, I hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. He noticed it too. "You don't have to answer," he said quietly. But from that moment on, the energy between us shifted. I started hiding things from my husband. Small things first. Deleting texts. Mentioning Eric less often. Smiling at my phone and turning it face down when notifications popped up. Every lie made the next one easier. The guilt was immediate, but weirdly, so was the thrill. After years of hospitals and medications and survival mode, I suddenly felt reckless again. Desired. Interesting. It was like waking up from a coma emotionally. One Friday, our team went out drinking after landing a major client. My husband texted around 10 asking if I needed a ride home. I ignored it. Eric and I ended up at another bar together after everyone else left. I remember almost every detail from that night. The smell of whiskey on his jacket. The neon lights reflecting off wet pavement outside. The way he looked at me when I laughed. And I remember the exact moment I crossed the line. He touched my hand. That was it. Something in my brain should have screamed stop. Instead, I held his hand back. We kissed in the parking lot like two teenagers. The second it happened, I felt sick. Actual physical nausea. I pulled away and started crying immediately. Eric looked stunned, like he thought I was overreacting. "I can't do this," I kept saying. He apologized. Said he got carried away. Said we could pretend it never happened. I went home shaking. My husband was asleep on the couch waiting for me. That image still destroys me. He'd left the lamp on because he knew I hated coming home to a dark apartment. There was a blanket half falling off him and one of his pain medication bottles sitting on the coffee table from the surgery complications he was still recovering from. And I had another man's cologne on my neck. I stood there staring at him for maybe 5 full minutes. I should have confessed right then. Instead, I went to the bathroom, scrubbed my skin raw in the shower, and climbed into bed beside him pretending nothing happened. That was the moment I became someone I didn't recognize anymore. Because after you successfully hide something that horrible once, your brain starts believing maybe you can keep doing it. Eric texted me the next morning. "I know this is messy, but I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at that message for an hour. Then I replied, "Me neither." That should have been the end. Instead, it became the beginning of the worst months of my life. The affair became physical 2 weeks later. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic moment where I completely lost control. Some huge fight with my husband. Some excuse that would make me sound less awful. There wasn't. It happened because I kept choosing it. That's the ugliest truth about cheating. People imagine accidents. Weak moments. But most of it is deliberate. 100 selfish decisions stacked on top of each other until you're buried underneath them. Eric booked a hotel room during a work conference 2 hours away from home. Even writing that makes me feel disgusting. I told my husband the company wanted us staying overnight because of networking events. He kissed my forehead and told me to have fun. Have fun. God. The entire drive there I kept thinking about turning around. I even picked up my phone twice to call Eric and cancel. But then he'd text something flirtatious and I'd feel that rush again. When I walked into the hotel room, I already knew exactly why I was there. And for a little while, I managed to forget everything else. That's the part nobody talks about honestly enough. Affairs survive because they exist outside reality. No bills. No hospital appointments. No years of emotional baggage. Just adrenaline and fantasy. Eric only knew the edited version of me. The fun version. Not the exhausted woman who cried during dialysis treatments. Not the wife who woke up at 3 a.m. terrified her body was failing again. Not the person carrying crushing guilt every second of every day. For those few hours, I got to pretend I was somebody else. Then I came home. And reality hit me like a truck. My husband had cleaned the apartment while I was gone because he wanted me to come home to a relaxing space. He'd bought my favorite snacks. He even picked up flowers from the grocery store. Cheap flowers. The kind wrapped in plastic. I almost started hyperventilating when I saw them sitting on the kitchen counter. Because suddenly the contrast between the two men became unbearable. One man risked his body to save my life. The other barely knew me. And somehow I'd betrayed the wrong person. That night my husband wrapped his arm around me while we slept, and I silently cried into the pillow beside him so he wouldn't hear me. I wanted to stop. I truly did. But once the secrecy becomes part of your routine, it changes your brain. You start compartmentalizing. You become terrifyingly good at acting normal. I'd text Eric while sitting beside my husband on the couch. Delete messages in grocery store bathrooms. Invent fake meetings so we could see each other. And every time my husband smiled at me, guilt stabbed through me so hard I thought it would finally force me to confess. Instead, I'd overcompensate. I became weirdly affectionate. Cooked his favorite meals. Bought random gifts. Initiated intimacy more often because part of me desperately wanted to feel connected to him again. But during those moments, I'd sometimes catch sight of his surgery scar. And my stomach would drop instantly. One night he noticed me staring at it. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. He smiled and touched my face. "You know I'd do it all over again, right?" That sentence nearly broke me. Because he meant it. Completely. And I was actively betraying him while he said it. A week later, Eric told me he was falling in love with me. I remember sitting frozen in his car after he said it. Not because I felt the same. But because hearing it out loud suddenly made the affair feel real instead of temporary. Dangerous instead of exciting. And deep down, I think I finally realized this wasn't going to stay hidden forever. After Eric said he loved me, things started getting ugly. Before that, the affair had existed in this fake little bubble where we could pretend nobody was getting hurt. But emotions ruin fantasy fast. He started wanting more of my time. More attention. More reassurance. More promises. And I started panicking. I'd wake up beside my husband feeling this crushing dread in my chest before my feet even touched the floor. Every notification on my phone made my heart race. Every time my husband casually asked, "Who's texting you?" I felt like I was about to throw up. The stress started changing me physically. I stopped sleeping properly. Stopped eating normally. I became irritable all the time. My husband noticed immediately. "You sure your labs are okay?" he asked one night while we ate dinner. That question almost made me laugh hysterically. He thought my body was rejecting the kidney. In reality, I was collapsing under the weight of my own lies. I reassured him everything was fine, but he kept watching me with concern that only made me feel worse. Then came the first real crack. One Saturday afternoon, I left my phone in the kitchen while showering. When I came back out, my husband was sitting on the couch looking pale. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier. He just looked confused. My stomach dropped instantly. "Who's Eric?" he asked quietly. I think every cheater imagines this moment differently. Maybe yelling. Maybe dramatic confrontation. Reality was worse. His voice sounded genuinely hurt before he even knew the full truth. I looked at my phone and saw the preview notification still glowing on the screen. "I miss you already." Nothing explicit. But enough. I lied immediately. Coworker. Work friend. Inside joke. The excuses came out automatically, almost rehearsed from months of deception. And the horrifying thing? He believed me. Or maybe he wanted to believe me. He nodded slowly and apologized for looking at my phone at all. Actually apologized to me. That should have ended everything right there. Instead, I doubled down harder. I told Eric we needed to cool things off because my husband was getting suspicious. Eric got frustrated immediately. "We're sneaking around like teenagers," he snapped during one argument. Does he seriously have no idea? The way he said he made me irrationally angry. Like my husband was some obstacle instead of a human being. "He's my husband," I said coldly. Eric laughed under his breath. "The husband whose kidney is literally inside you?" I still remember how silent the room became after that sentence. Because neither of us had ever said it out loud before. The kidney. The sacrifice. The thing sitting underneath everything we were doing. I told him never to say that again. But the damage was done. For the first time, I saw myself through someone else's eyes. Not misunderstood. Not emotionally trapped. Not finding herself. Just cruel. That realization should have pushed me to confess. Instead, I became desperate to keep both worlds from collapsing. I avoided Eric more often. Spent extra time with my husband. Tried convincing myself I could quietly end the affair and nobody would ever know. But affairs don't die cleanly once feelings get involved. Eric started getting jealous. If I didn't text back quickly enough, he'd spiral. If I cancelled plans, he'd accuse me of choosing my husband over him. Which was insane because of course I was choosing my husband. At least emotionally, I wanted to. But by then my actions meant something completely different. Then one night Eric asked me a question I still hear in my head constantly. If your husband hadn't saved your life, would you even still be with him? And for a second. Just 1 second. I didn't answer fast enough. He noticed. And so did I. That question destroyed me because I couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. Not because I didn't love my husband. I did. In some ways, I still do. But love starts becoming complicated when gratitude, guilt, dependence, and obligation all get tangled together. Somewhere during my illness, our marriage stopped feeling equal. He became my caretaker, my protector, my lifesaver. And I became the person always needing something. Medication. Support. Help. Patience. By the time I recovered physically, I didn't even know who I was outside of being sick anymore. That doesn't excuse what I did. But it explains why attention from Eric hit me so hard. With him, I didn't feel fragile. I felt wanted. There's a difference. A few days after that conversation, my husband surprised me with a weekend trip to a cabin near a lake we used to visit while dating. He said we needed time together. The entire drive there, guilt sat in my throat like poison. He was excited. Talking about hiking trails and restaurants nearby. Meanwhile, I was secretly checking my phone whenever he looked away because Eric wouldn't stop texting me. At one point my husband reached over and squeezed my knee. "You seem far away lately," he said softly. That almost broke me right there in the car. I wanted to confess so badly that it physically hurt. But confession felt impossible because there was no version of this where he didn't get destroyed. And selfishly, I still wanted him to love me. That's another ugly truth people avoid admitting. Many cheaters don't want to leave their partners. They want both things at once. Stability and excitement. Safety and validation. It's selfishness at its purest form. The cabin should have been romantic. Instead it felt like attending my own funeral. That first night we sat outside wrapped in blankets watching the water. My husband looked happier than he had in months. Then he said something that made my chest tighten instantly. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said carefully, "about how close I came to losing you." I stared straight ahead at the lake. "I don't think I tell you enough how grateful I am you stayed strong through all of that." Grateful. That word again. He kept talking while I silently fell apart beside him. "You know, after surgery, everyone kept calling me heroic or whatever. But honestly, you're the strongest person I know." I had to look away because tears started forming immediately. If he'd been cruel or controlling, maybe this would hurt less to remember. But he wasn't. He was kind. Consistently kind. That night we slept together for the first time in weeks without me mentally checking out halfway through. For a few hours, it genuinely felt like maybe we could survive this. Maybe I could end the affair quietly. Maybe I could become a better wife. Maybe nobody ever had to know. Then the next morning I woke up to 23 missed calls from Eric. 23. My husband was in the shower when I listened to the voicemails. Some angry. Some drunk. Some emotional. And the final one made my blood run cold. "If you don't talk to me today, I swear I'm done protecting you." Protecting me. The wording terrified me instantly. I called him back while standing outside the cabin shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. "What the hell does that mean?" I whispered. Eric sounded exhausted. It means I'm tired of feeling like your dirty secret. I told him to calm down before my husband heard me. Wrong thing to say. Eric laughed bitterly, still worried about him finding out. Then came the sentence that changed everything. You should have thought about that before sleeping with me. The rest of that trip felt cursed. I barely slept after the phone call with Eric. Every sound outside the cabin made me jump. Every time my husband touched me, guilt flooded through my body so intensely I thought I might finally confess just to make it stop. But fear kept winning. Fear of losing him. Fear of becoming the villain everyone would hate. Fear of destroying the one person who had literally sacrificed part of himself for me. When we drove home Sunday evening, my husband reached over and held my hand almost the entire ride. Meanwhile, I was mentally preparing for damage control. Eric ignored my texts for hours after we got back. Then around midnight, he finally replied. We need to talk in person. I barely slept that night either. The next day I met him in the parking garage outside his apartment building after work. The second I saw his face, I knew something had shifted. He looked angry in a cold, exhausted way. Not emotional anymore. Done. You can't keep doing this, he said immediately. I know. No, you don't. He laughed bitterly. You go home every night to your husband while I sit here waiting for scraps of your attention. I told him we needed to end things before someone got hurt worse. The irony of that statement almost makes me sick now. Someone already was getting hurt worse. He stepped closer to me. Do you even love him? Yes, I answered instantly. Then why are you here? I didn't have an answer. Because there wasn't a good one. Eric stared at me for a long time before shaking his head. You know what the messed up part is, he said quietly. I actually felt bad for you at first. That irritated me immediately. What's that supposed to mean? It means your whole marriage feels built on guilt. I told him he didn't understand anything about our relationship. And maybe he didn't. But then he said something that hit harder than I expected. You don't look at your husband like a partner, he said. You look at him like someone you owe. That sentence followed me home like a ghost. Because deep down, part of me feared he was right. Not entirely, but enough. When I got home, my husband was cooking dinner. Music was playing softly in the kitchen. He smiled the second he saw me. Normal. Warm. Safe. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. I walked straight to the bathroom and locked the door before he could notice my face. I remember staring at myself in the mirror thinking, how did I become this person? Not just the cheating, the lying, the manipulation, the emotional splitting between two lives. I barely recognized myself anymore. That night my husband asked if I wanted to start trying for kids next year now that my health had stabilized. I genuinely think my heart stopped for a second. Kids. Future. Family. Meanwhile, I was secretly detonating our marriage behind his back. I muttered something vague about wanting more recovery time first. He nodded understandingly, completely unaware that I was internally spiraling. Then came the moment everything finally collapsed. 3 days later, my husband called me during lunch sounding strange. Too calm. Hey, he said quietly. Can you come home after work? We need to talk. Instant panic hit me. What happened? Long silence. Then. I know about Eric. I felt all the blood leave my body instantly. I don't even remember leaving work. I drove home shaking so badly I nearly ran a red light. And the entire drive, one thought kept repeating in my head over and over. He knows. He knows. He knows. When I walked into the apartment, my husband was sitting at the kitchen table. My phone was beside him. And for a second, neither of us spoke. I'll never forget his face. Not rage. Not screaming. Not dramatic movie-style heartbreak. He looked hollow. Like someone had reached inside him and removed something vital. That expression haunts me more than anything else. I asked how much he knew, even though I already understood the answer was probably everything. He looked down at the table for a long moment before speaking. Enough. His voice sounded strange. Flat. Controlled in the way people sound when they're trying very hard not to completely fall apart. Apparently, Eric had sent me messages while I was showering again. This time explicit enough that there was no explaining them away. My husband said he stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes before opening the conversation. He read months of messages. Photos. Plans. Lies. Everything. I remember sitting down because my legs suddenly felt weak. Then I started crying immediately. Not graceful crying either. Full panic. Hyperventilating. Trying to explain 6 months of betrayal in broken sentences. And he just sat there listening. That somehow made it worse. At one point I reached for his hand and he physically flinched away from me. That moment hit harder than yelling ever could have. He asked one question first. "Did you sleep with him?" I nodded. He closed his eyes instantly like the answer caused actual physical pain. Then came the second question. "How many times?" I whispered, "I don't know." Wrong answer. His jaw tightened and he laughed once under his breath. Not because anything was funny. It sounded more like disbelief. "I gave you my kidney," he said quietly. There it was. The sentence I'd been dreading for months. Not because he was weaponizing it, but because it was true. And suddenly the reality of what I'd done became horrifyingly clear outside my own head. I started apologizing over and over. Saying it wasn't about him. Saying I was mentally messed up after everything we'd gone through. Then he asked the question that completely shattered me. "Did you ever think about me while you were with him?" I couldn't answer. Because yes. Sometimes I had. And admitting that out loud felt too monstrous to survive. The silence gave him the answer anyway. I watched his eyes water for the first time since I walked in. Not full crying. Just enough that I could see him trying desperately to hold himself together. Then he asked something even worse. "Was any of it real?" he whispered. "Us, I mean." That question destroyed me because the truthful answer was yes. I loved him. I still loved him while betraying him. Which somehow made my actions even crueler. I kept trying to explain feelings that didn't even make sense to me anymore. The guilt. The pressure. Feeling trapped by gratitude. Wanting to feel normal again. The more I talked, the worse it sounded. Because there is no explanation for betrayal that doesn't sound selfish once spoken aloud. Finally he interrupted me. "You could have left," he said quietly. And he was right. That's the part that destroys me now. If I was unhappy, if I felt disconnected, if I needed freedom, I could have left. Instead, I chose deception because I wanted comfort without consequences. Then he looked at me with tears finally falling down his face and asked, "Did saving your life mean so little to you?" I think something inside me broke permanently hearing that. Because the answer was no. It meant everything. And somehow I still betrayed him anyway. That night lasted forever. At some point my husband stopped asking questions and just sat there staring at the wall while I cried across from him. The silence became unbearable. I kept trying to apologize, but apologies sounded meaningless in the middle of all that damage. Finally he stood up and walked to the bedroom without saying anything. I followed him instinctively. He opened the closet, grabbed a duffel bag, and started throwing clothes into it. That's when panic really hit me. "Please don't leave," I said immediately. He didn't answer. "I'll end it completely." I already was trying to. That made him stop. He turned around slowly and looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Disgust. "You were trying to," he repeated quietly. I realized instantly how bad that sounded. Like he should be grateful I planned on eventually stopping cheating on him. I started crying harder, trying to explain myself, but he just shook his head. "I don't even know who you are right now." That sentence hurt because I agreed with him. He zipped the bag and walked toward the front door. I grabbed his arm without thinking. The second I touched him, he pulled away sharply. "Don't," he snapped. First time all night his voice had any real emotion in it. I froze. Then he looked down at the floor like he regretted even raising his voice. "I can't look at you right now," he whispered. And then he left. The apartment felt horrifyingly quiet afterward. I sat on the kitchen floor for hours staring at nothing. My phone kept buzzing beside me with messages from Eric asking what happened. I ignored all of them. Around 3 a.m., I finally looked at social media and realized my husband had removed every photo of us from his profiles. Every single one. That's when I understood this wasn't just damage. I might have actually ended my marriage permanently. The next morning his mother called me. I almost didn't answer. She sounded confused at first, asking if everything was okay because my husband had shown up at her house in the middle of the night looking devastated. I couldn't even form sentences properly. Then she asked softly, "What happened?" I broke down immediately. I admitted everything. And the silence on the other end of the phone was one of the worst moments of my life. His mother used to adore me. She defended me through every stage of my illness. Sat beside my hospital bed. Helped organize fundraisers during treatments. She once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to her son. Now she sounded like she didn't recognize me anymore either. Finally she spoke. "He loved you more than himself." No yelling. No insults. Honestly, I think I would have preferred screaming. Before hanging up, she said something that still echoes in my head constantly. "I just don't understand why you didn't let him go before hurting him like this." Neither did I. Not fully. That same day Eric came to my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door. The second he saw my face, he knew. He found out. I nodded. And suddenly the affair lost every ounce of excitement it ever had. No adrenaline. No fantasy. No escape. Just consequences sitting in the middle of my living room. Eric tried comforting me at first, saying maybe this meant we could finally be together openly now. The second he said that, something inside me recoiled immediately, because hearing it out loud made me realize how disconnected the affair had always been from reality. I didn't want a future with Eric. I wanted temporary escape from myself. And now that escape had destroyed the person who mattered most. I told Eric he needed to leave. He looked stunned. "You're ending this now?" I stared at him in disbelief. "My husband knows." And that single word made me realize how differently we viewed what happened. To Eric, this was a relationship obstacle. To me, it felt like a moral catastrophe I could never undo. After Eric left, I blocked his number. Then I blocked him everywhere else too. Not because I suddenly became a good person overnight. The damage was already done. But the illusion finally collapsed completely once my husband knew. Without secrecy, the affair looked pathetic. Small. Two selfish people feeding off validation while someone innocent got destroyed in the background. I spent the next week alone in the apartment, barely functioning. My husband wouldn't answer my calls. Wouldn't respond to texts. Nothing. I kept typing huge emotional messages and deleting them because none of the words felt sufficient. Sorry sounded microscopic compared to what I'd done. Eventually he sent one text. "I need space. Please stop contacting me for now." Reading that felt like getting punched in the chest. Because even then, he was still being kinder to me than I deserved. I found out later he'd taken time off work because he physically couldn't focus. One of our mutual friends told me he looked exhausted all the time and barely spoke to anyone. That information destroyed me. Not because I wanted pity for myself. Because for the first time, I was forced to fully confront the emotional violence of betrayal from outside my own perspective. Cheating isn't just sex. It's rewriting someone's reality without their consent. Every memory becomes suspicious afterward. Every loving moment feels contaminated. Every act of kindness starts feeling humiliating in hindsight. I did that to him. One afternoon I gathered enough courage to go to his mother's house hoping maybe he'd talk to me. When she opened the door, her face hardened immediately. I asked if he was there. She said yes. But then she blocked the doorway. "I don't think seeing you would help him right now." I started crying instantly. Again. At some point during all this, I became someone who cried constantly. Like my body was trying to expel guilt physically. I told her I just wanted to apologize properly. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You know what hurts him most, she said quietly. It's not even the cheating itself. I waited. He thinks your entire marriage was fake. That hit me like a knife. Because it wasn't fake. The love was real. The memories were real. The life we built together was real. But betrayal contaminates reality so thoroughly that the truth stops mattering. Before leaving, I asked her one question I already feared I knew the answer to. Does he hate me? She sighed softly. No, she said. That's the problem. Somehow that hurt even worse. Weeks passed. Then months. We communicated mostly through lawyers by that point because my husband filed for divorce. Seeing the paperwork nearly made me throw up. Officially dissolving a marriage feels horrifyingly clinical considering how emotional the collapse actually is. There was one section asking for the reason. Irreconcilable differences. Such sterile wording for something so catastrophic. The only time I saw him in person again before the final hearing was when we met to exchange belongings. He looked thinner. Tired. But composed. And that almost made it harder. If he'd screamed at me, maybe I could have anchored myself to anger instead of grief. Instead he acted polite. Detached. Like I was someone he used to know. I tried apologizing again while we packed boxes. He listened quietly before stopping me. I believe you're sorry, he said. I felt this tiny flicker of hope hearing that. Then he continued. But being sorry doesn't undo what you did to me. And just like that, the hope disappeared again. Before I left, I looked at him and asked the question I'd been terrified to hear answered. Do you regret donating your kidney? He went completely silent. For several seconds, I genuinely thought he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he said, no. That broke me harder than if he'd said yes. The divorce finalized 4 months later. No dramatic courtroom fight. No screaming. No cinematic ending. Just signatures. That somehow made it feel emptier. When the judge asked if the marriage was irretrievably broken, my husband answered yes without even looking at me. I barely managed to say the word myself. Afterward, we walked out of the courthouse separately. 10 years together reduced to paperwork and silence. I sat in my car for almost an hour afterward crying so hard I could barely breathe. Not because I suddenly realized I'd made a mistake, I'd known that for months. It was because finality feels different. As long as we were separated, some delusional part of me still believed maybe I could fix this eventually. Maybe enough therapy, enough apologies, enough accountability could somehow rebuild what I destroyed. The divorce made me confront reality. Some damage doesn't heal back into what it was before. A few people eventually found out why we split. Not everyone. But enough. And once people hear the story, they simplify it immediately. Woman cheats on husband after kidney donation. Villain. Monster. Ungrateful wife. Honestly, I understand why. If I heard this story from someone else, I'd probably judge her too. What people don't understand is that becoming the worst version of yourself rarely happens all at once. It's usually gradual. Tiny compromises. Rationalizations. Emotional cowardice stacking quietly until one day you look around and realize you crossed lines you once swore you never would. That's what happened to me. None of it excuses my choices. I betrayed a man who loved me with extraordinary loyalty. A man who risked his health because he couldn't imagine a world where I died. And the cruelest part is that I think I understood the value of that love fully only after losing it. I'm in therapy now. Not the fake kind people do to feel absolved. Real therapy. The uncomfortable kind where you dissect ugly truths about yourself piece by piece. One thing my therapist said stuck with me. Guilt becomes useless if you only use it to punish yourself instead of understand yourself. For a long time, I thought hating myself enough would somehow balance the scales morally. It doesn't. It just keeps everyone trapped in the wreckage. So now I try to be honest instead. Honest about the fact that I wanted validation more than integrity. Honest about the fact that I avoided difficult conversations because I feared abandonment. Honest about the fact that I let shame turn into secrecy instead of accountability. and honest about the fact that my ex-husband deserved infinitely better than what I gave him. The last thing he ever said to me in person wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. After the divorce hearing, right before we walked toward separate parking lots, he finally looked at me directly for the first time all day. And he said quietly, "I hope you figure out why none of this was enough for you." Then he left. I still think about that sentence constantly because the horrifying truth is that he was enough. More than enough. The problem was that I stopped valuing what I had because pain and guilt distorted the way I saw love. People online love stories with clear heroes and villains. Real life is uglier. Sometimes you can deeply love someone and still traumatize them. Sometimes gratitude turns into pressure. Sometimes shame mutates into self-destruction. And sometimes the person who hurts you most is someone who genuinely did love you. I don't expect forgiveness from him. I don't think I've earned it. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being loved unconditionally does not automatically make you emotionally healthy enough to receive that love properly. And if you don't confront the broken parts of yourself honestly, you can destroy the very thing you prayed for when you were at your lowest.